thank you very much for being here, Tom. I'm a huge fan of yours and video poetry, but this goes way back. And then in 2011, you published what you called Video Poetry, a Manifesto. And this was done more than 3 decades after you coined the term. So why did you feel the need then to write a manifesto, and what does the manifesto say to anyone concerned or interested in video poems?
The manifesto was written in 2011, which is exactly 10 years ago. It looks like it withstood the test of time. It's been translated into to French, Spanish, German, and now Portuguese. So I'm very touched, you know, I'm very humbled by that it has reached so many people. And why? I was teaching a course in the University of Fraser Valley, and I suggested that I would like to teach a course on, not on video poetry specifically, but a course called Word and Image. So I wanted to trace visual poetry from concrete poetry, sound poetry, to video poetry. And I wanted to do some research, and the university was kind enough to allow me to travel to Buenos Aires, Berlin. So I mentioned those two because those are the two oldest archives of video poetry, and San Francisco, where there was also a poetry film operation festival happening there. So I got a chance to watch many poetry films in preparation for teaching the course in September. So I started in about March or April, and when I got to August, I said, I've got to do something here, I've got to write something, but I don't have enough time to write a book, a full book. So what can I write that would be of importance? What could be really important? And then the word manifesto came to me, and I said, well, there's nothing more important sounding than a manifesto. And that's powerful. What gave me the impetus to write it.
And from my understanding, in the late 70s, you started this whole concept out of boredom and rebellion.
That's correct. So very quickly, in the late 1970s, I was a member of an art gallery. We were an artist-run art gallery, and we were subsidized by the government of Canada, the Canada Council, and we were one of the first institutions, other than universities, to have video equipment. And myself and 6 other poets, we were 7 poets called the Vehicle Poets, because the gallery, art gallery, was called Vehicle Art Gallery. 7 of us poets got together to organize poetry readings and all kinds of events, marathon readings that went on all night. We had various projects that were poetry related. And what I did during the early 70s, early 78, I think it was, I organized a series, and I got a video camera, and I recorded all the poets who were going to be reading for us. And what I noticed was, from that experience as a poet, was that it was very boring. So I would imagine I would point a camera the way I guess it's being pointed at us right now, and about the only thing that you could do is zoom in and zoom out. And I was determined that if video, I had a vision that video, or really at that time television, alternative television, was really the future. And I felt that poetry really wasn't moving in that direction or taking advantage of this new medium to any degree. Right. There was a lot of video art. I was very familiar with that because I was in the art gallery and I saw many video artists working. We had all disciplines in our art gallery. So I was familiar with video art, but I wanted to do something for poetry. And
what really,
yes.
Pardon my French, but what really pissed you off
Yes.
Was that traditionally poetry is still recited by one voice facing the audience from a podium, and that's very it's boring. So what was your next step? What was your contribution to the advancements and to us being here today discussing video poetry?
So what I did was I set up the camera and I wanted it to be a performance, like a poetry reading, which is based on time, about reading a poem from beginning to end. And I didn't want it edited in the traditional film sense. So what I did was I set up a situation where I could be reading and I could be interrupted by a voice that would say, "Stop, stop." And then I would start reading another part of the poem. And then I would be reading a couple of lines, and then you would hear, "Stop, stop." And then I would be able to, again, use that opportunity to read another fragment. So I started to create these fragments as far as the spoken word is concerned. As far as the image is concerned, I was interested in no longer facing the audience, but I sat in profile.
Like a silhouette?
Like a silhouette. I was seated behind the screen. And if you're interested, I don't know how long it's going to be running for, but it is being played upstairs in Salle de Pessoa, which is a real honor, you have to understand. So I'm sitting there in profile, and I'm leaning, and I've got a music stand where my text is written out for me, and I'm reading the poem. You're the audience, but I'm reading the poem away from the audience. And when I hear "stop, stop," then I lean out of the picture, and instead of seeing my silhouette, you're seeing a red stop sign, but it's not a stop sign, it's the interior of a stop sign. So it's kind of like a minimalist capture of a stop sign. I took many slides of the interior of a stop sign, and we used that as slides to project over the time when another poet would be calling out, "Stop, stop." So I would be out of the frame, and then I would lean back into the frame and read my next line. So essentially, what I was creating there was a performance in real time, but I was parodying the editing process of a typical filmmaker who would be editing the stops and this and that together, but I was doing it all in real time.
Yes, and you're talking, of course, about your first video poem from
Sympathies of War.
Yeah, from 1978. which, apart from those aspects that you just mentioned, and that being read as a telegram, with the stop being said, there's a snippet of a concert that you recorded from a tape recorder of a concert of Anthony Braxton, one of my favorite jazz musicians.
As it happens.
But then I think on the same year, you added, some days after that, you added a postscript where you're tearing off pages from a notebook and writing in real time. And there's a line that really struck me, which was, "I am the shadow of the poet to be." What does this mean?
Well,
hard question.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say that what you're seeing on the screen is a video machine playing the original video of me performing Sympathies of War. And the only thing you're seeing is the needle of the audio meter. And you're hearing the sound come in and out. And instead of the stop, I am actually writing on a little booklet that I'm tearing pages off. So that is the structure. That's the frame of that particular work. So structures were always very important to me. Just like Sympathies of War, the structure was, don't face the camera, sit behind the screen, do it this way, do it that way, everything very structured. But you asked me about I'm the shadow of the poet to be. Well, obviously, it means that I'm the image of the new poet, of the poet of the future. I'm the shadow of the poet to be. And when I wrote that, it's very interesting to me, anyway, that when I wrote that on the paper, on the notepad, I wrote, "I'm the shadow of the poet," and I paused. ... And then I gave that. Oh, that has meaning, right? I'm the shadow of the poet. Oh, okay, you're the shadow of the poet. Okay, well, that's a very imagistic kind of line. But then I'm the shadow of the poet to be creates a whole new meaning to that original part of the sentence. And I guess that I was trying to say, this is where the future is going, and this is where poetry is going.
And do you think you were proven right after all these years?
Oh, absolutely.
My question is, since sometimes when we go to a poetry club or something, most of the times that's the same old setup, like a poet facing the audience, not like in a silhouette or like you were just mentioning. So some poetry is still read and performed the old way, but you just opened up an avenue of new forms. And forms and art forms are really dear to your heart and speak really highly to your heart. So you were proven right. That's your understanding.
Well, I was proven right by the few artists who have created works that I very much admire.
Right.
That they are also following, I guess, in my footsteps, but following that direction. But you're right. I mean, there's the majority of poets out there. They're still standing in front of an audience and reading from a book. And I have nothing against that. I
But
mean,
if you were to attend a poetry event performed like that, and you were in the audience, would you shout "boring"?
only if I was with you.
Okay, okay. And since we are talking about us, me and you, and our bromance that has like 15 minutes.
The hat belongs.
Yes, there
to
you
the
go.
elder.
And what about those?
Oh, so I'd like to bring your attention to if the camera can actually move from framing us. What we have here are three objects. And I suggested these three objects because they speak to me very directly, very intimately, personally. There was a young poet who was writing in the late 19th century in France called Isidore Ducasse, who also became known by this very cool name called Comte de l'Autremont. And he was a kind of a rebel, like me, I guess. And he wrote a novel, a series of kind of prose poems called Les Chants de Maldoror, the Songs of Maldoror. But what really struck me was one particular sentence that he had written. And the sentence was as follows: as beautiful as the chance encounter of an umbrella and a sewing machine on a dissecting table. Now, I know this is not a dissecting table, but it's close enough to illustrate that he had brought three very dissimilar objects into a cohesion, into an incongruent unity that later, about 30 years later, the surrealists discovered him, and they said, wow, this guy who wrote about an umbrella and a sewing machine on a dissecting table, he was really cool. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this really cool idea into our time today is because of the number 3. So what Isidore Ducasse came up with was that we have 3 objects which have very little to do with one another, except that he had chosen them, kind of like Marcel Duchamp, who chose certain objects and brought them into a relationship together. And these 3 objects together create a whole new type of experience. So to relate this to video poetry, which is why I'm here, is that video poetry is made up of 3 elements also. It's made up of video, visual, words, verbal, and sounds, audio. And if we take those 3 elements and we treat them in the same type of relationship as you see over here, then you will be practicing the art of video poetry. So I want to differentiate. So what my manifesto did, to bring you back to that, was that I would like to differentiate between video poetry or poetry films or poetry videos, as they're sometimes called, where we have a poem that was written really for the page to be recited, and we have a background or some kind of an image that frames this particular recital, whether on camera or not. And I wanted it to be more of this kind of relationship than a more traditional kind of relationship.
So these seemingly incongruous elements that you try to combine.
Yes.
And there's a very good video poem of yours, Québécois. that you did in 1982, the year I was born, which is a satirical take on the ongoing language war in Canada. So there are many plays on words around Quebec written on the screen, and then a man mowing the lawn. So that's perfect. I think you just that's what you were referring to,
yeah.
right? So and you're always trying to find the collaborative potential of stuff lying around in various forms. And so then you moved to Vancouver in 93. And
83.
93, right?
83.
Okay, you should know better than me.
My wife would argue with you.
I'm sorry. And you were just strolling around and walking the streets, trying to, again, come up with images, with video footage that you could use afterwards. And then you go and see all these graffiti on the walls of Vancouver, and you come up with sign language. So, for a very formal, boring poet, introducing graffiti in a poem is like something very unusual and erratic, I'll say, but that's not the way you work.
No. When you're walking around, and by the way, Lisbon has a lot of graffiti. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. But let's call it street art.
Right.
Okay, let's not call it graffiti because there's a certain, je ne sais quoi. You're walking around and you're seeing, especially in Vancouver, what I was seeing, I just moved to Vancouver. I met my wife Marlene, and we moved to Vancouver from Montreal, and I'm learning about this new city that I'm going to be living in. And our graffiti, there was a lot of words in our graffiti around town. There were a lot of opinions that were being written on the walls. And this interested me. Wherever text appears, and boy, I mean, I have to tell you, to be here in Oeiras, where text is, where poetry, not just text, but poetry mm-hmm. is everywhere. I mean, look at, this park of poets. And, from the ground up everywhere, sculptures.
And this temple of poetry.
The temple of poetry, my God. Isn't that the right phrase for that? Yeah. So in Vancouver, I saw a lot of opinions being, and observations about life being written on the walls. And I took my camera and I started recording them, almost like still shots. But as I was editing it together, so I started to put all this together, and it started to almost tell a little story. And I couldn't help it. It was kind of like, these are, the umbrella and the sewing machine were all these different shots that were very separate from one another, that there was one graffiti artist here and another graffiti artist there, and they were coming together, the chance encounter of these video artists, of these graffiti artists, the street artists, was coming together in a videotape. Mm-hmm. The dissecting table was the actual videotape that I was working with. And I found a soundtrack by John Lurie. Some of you may know him, mm-hmm. A New York musician. He had the band Lounge Lizards, mm-hmm. and this was a song called You Haunt Me, and I thought that it really expressed my melancholia, and you have a word called saudade.
Saudade.
saudade. And it sort of made me feel like that. That's a good word to explain how I felt when I put that particular video together. So all those elements came together in that one work.
In a certain way, you were collecting, you were also recycling, you were transforming, and eventually finding hidden messages in those elements that when they're separate apart from one another, they may not convey the hidden messages that when combined you can come up with. Right? That's something. That's really something. And I'm always impressed by some artist, whether a poet, a musician, who doesn't care about boundaries and being categorized as, I don't know, a jazz musician or part of the bebop scene or whatever. So that's really inspiring for me, at least, and I feel that for many people. Most recently, you come up with a very funny idea, which was to go to your mailbox and extract hundreds of email scam messages and put on screen snippets of text like randomly, but when put on screen, those scam messages end up being really funny. And I read that you, talking about that particular video poem, you said, the context of the original ludicrous promises, conveyed by those email scam messages, is subverted for the sake of poetry.
Poetry, right. So the messages that we're talking about here are the ones that they came from Nigeria to begin with. So we have to give them their origins, They were the creators of this particular art form.
I think anyone in the room everyone has received an email from the Prince of Nigeria.
You can get $1 million, as long as you send them $25. And then maybe $125. But, so the idea is to scam the public. And in order to do that, they have to touch you emotionally. They have to appeal to you, to your sense of charity, or, my father is being assassinated, and my uncle is
dying of cancer.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So what I did was I looked very carefully through these messages, and I took out the parts that had nothing to do with asking for money, that had to do with some kind of personal truth, a personal truth that I could use and transform into a work of art.
But a personal truth based on a lie.
Based on a lie, exactly. But if you present it, if these are lies and you put them together in a certain new form that they're not used to, then they can produce a different kind of experience.
What's your take on Eric Satie and musique concrète?
Eric Satie?
Yeah.
Some people wonder why I say 3 elements when there's really only 2 elements. There's video and there's audio. So the audio is usually the poet reading, but I think that the 3 elements, that the 2 elements of sound could be presented in very different ways. So the voice has a certain function of communicating ideas, feelings, to touch us in a certain way. And music has a different way of touching us. And if you look at my work, you will see that I am quite careful about what I select for a soundtrack that is not a recital of a poem. So it is very important to have a soundtrack that has meaning, because again, I'm looking at the soundtrack like an element that I'm bringing out of its original. I'm taking the fish out of the fish bowl and saying, no, I want you to live in this new element. And that's the way I like to treat soundtracks. There was one, I don't know if you've seen, Beware of Dog. And Beware of Dog is a video poem that I made in which there's a disco club beat. And in the background you hear, ha ha, ha, and I really liked that, the rhythm, and I liked, and well, of course, you know, how it was made into something that was quite different. But I would select soundtracks from any source, or even just ambient sound could make a difference as well.
Do you still go on the streets and with your, I presume, iPhone or smartphone, collecting, you know, sounds to use later and put in a video poem?
I did one today, actually. Okay. I was walking along your cobbled streets, and lately I've been thinking about another festival, a video poetry festival happening in Buenos Aires called Video Bardo. And Javier Robledo, who runs it, is a good friend of mine. And he made a video poem a long time ago called Video Poesia. Poesia, just Poesia. He had found a rock. He came across this rock that was six-sided. So he painted
an hexagon.
Yes,
right?
And he painted with white paint the letters Poesia, Poesia, all over this rock. And he walked along the street and he kept throwing this rock
like a dice.
Exactly, like Mallarmé's dice, if you want to look at that. What was interesting to me about that was how he managed or modified the visuals. Instead of just, you know, walking along, throwing it on the street, he made there are cobblestones, by the way, in case you're interested, in Buenos Aires. Yes, there are cobblestone streets there too. And he made the street kind of like a hilly, very wavy, as if the street itself was creating waves somehow. And as I was walking today, I said, you know, these aren't very straight. These cobblestones here really remind me of Javier's. So I did a little recording of that, and we'll see what becomes of it. You know, so the idea is to collect, as you say, and to put it in your pocket and keep it for a while until it suggests something to you, and then you can work with it.
I'll ask you an awful question, which is, what comes first? What art form comes first? It depends.
Yeah, no, so I would like to give you a good answer to that. And
To an awful question.
to an awful question, and that is the work knows.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever that work becomes, when you look back on it, you can't tell when you're first writing the text or when you're first capturing an image with your camera, or you hear a soundtrack that you say, oh, that little piece there, I could use that, I could loop it, I could modify it, I could change the pitch on it, I could work with it, I could do this, I could do that. Whatever the work ends up being, when you look back on it, you say, how do you like that? It was the sound that came first.
So your workplace, which is the whole world, potentially, is like a playground.
Exactly. And your senses...
And you're a child.
Yeah.
And you're a child working with toys.
Absolutely. I love that expression.
But don't you think there's a concern of yours to keep a balance between the visual text and the image and the words in a way that one does not dominate the other, and they are like a symbiosis of things, and because I'm talking about overlapping art forms,
right,
and art and forms of expressing what you want to express. So I sense whenever I see a video poem of yours that you try, even though you're a child playing with your toys, I sense that you have a great concern to keep those elements equal in importance. Am I wrong?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Which is a good way to answer that. On the one hand, I thought you were referring to, I've written quite a bit about video poetry so far. It could be found, my writings could be found on academia.edu. And in there I do talk about, in those essays, I do talk about a balance between the elements. But the truth is that over the years, my reading has led me to agree with the suggestion that there's one element that is the dominant element, and that you can't get away from that. No matter how much you try to balance, then your words will just dominate the image, or the image, you know, if you've seen video poems that are very technically, you know, entertaining, you know, and oh my God, look at what they're doing, and they're doing all these special effects, and it's so fantastic. So there, you can't help but have one dominant element. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you would like all the elements to work together in harmony, but that's not the way life is.
Right. So going back, and we have 5 minutes to end this, but going back to you to your late 70s, so in 1970s, late 1970s, you were, well, sort of complaining about working in a vacuum, because you didn't have precedents that, you know, were there before you to guide you and help you. What about now? What are your... Do you have any references, apart from, of course, the artists you admire, that can now say that, well, I had this guy, this Tom, that paved the way for me to be at this place and at this particular time of the world, and you are friends with them. Are there any artists and any movie poets that you admire right now and that followed your steps?
Yes, I imagine that there are a few who kind of understand where I'm coming from, and I do have a few friends that I follow with their work, and I comment on their work as well. I just want to say that there is no more vacuum. You know, there was a perfect vacuum in 1978 when I created those video poems, and we showed them in the gallery, actually, and there were people coming and going and going and coming, and that's another reference right there. But and they would see it on the screen and they would say, "Oh, that's so cool," you know. And it was just part of life, part of the art gallery experience. They weren't looking at it and saying, "Wow, I've never seen poetry done on a screen before in this way." It wasn't a concern, you know. It was just part of the art scene where you were living. But I wanted to know who else was doing the kind of work that I was doing, and I really did miss that. Mm-hmm. I really did miss having that rapport, you know, or that feedback, or which today, I mean, the internet is phenomenal. I mean, you could be on FaceTime with someone from another part of the world, and you could go to your screen and say, "Oh, look at this edit that I just did." Click. So what do you think of that? And then, "I like it, but maybe you should move that over this way." Mm-hmm. That's phenomenal, you know, to have that today. That's what I wished for when I first started out.
So since you're not working in a vacuum, is it safe to say that you are no longer working in that vacuum because you came up with a vacuum cleaner?
Yes, absolutely. You hear that, guys? He just added a vacuum cleaner to you.
To the whole set.
Yeah. I don't know what you want me to say. Yeah, I think I saw the world differently in those days, and now I see the world differently now. Mm-hmm. I felt at a certain point, 10 years ago, I felt that it might be more interesting for me to create a work of art by writing something theoretical. So in a way, my manifesto was a creative act because I didn't have a video poem to work on. I said, you know, I want to do this. I want to write a manifesto as a creative act, and it worked. And then I kept writing and writing, and you keep writing and telling people your vision until somebody comes along, like Elder, and says, "Wait a minute, you know, I think differently." So when I hear that, then I will be listening very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you for your manifesto, which is great, and thank you so much for being here with us. Enjoy your time in not only Lisbon, but around Portugal, because you rented a car with your wife, and will be traveling around 3 weeks before going back to Vancouver. Thank you so much for being here, Tom. It was a pleasure. And I think he deserves an applause. E muito obrigado também ao nosso público que esteve aqui presente e quem nos acompanhou online. A Bienal de Poesia continuará já a seguir. Muito obrigado.